On Sunday evening, Russia claimed to have thwarted a major Ukrainian offensive in Donbas involving thousands of Ukrainian troops. Now, while the reports were originally denied by Kyiv, there has since been a massive uptick in activity across the entire front line in Ukraine, and it really does look like Ukraine's much-anticipated counteroffensive has begun. This video, we're going to take a look at what's happened so far, what might happen next, and perhaps most importantly, who blew up the Nova Kakhovka Dam. So the first thing we should say in anticipation of the angry comments, we know that the Ukrainian armed forces have requested operational silence on this issue, but nothing in this video violates that or could put any Ukrainian troops at risk. Almost all of the information from this video is coming from Russian Telegram channels, and it's stuff that Russian military bloggers, let alone the Kremlin, are already aware of. Anyway, with that being said, let's get into it. On Sunday, Russia's defense ministry claimed that it had thwarted a major Ukrainian attack in Donbas, apparently involving 8 Ukrainian battalions and thousands of Ukrainian troops. While the Ukrainians insisted that they didn't know what the Russians were talking about, the attack did come after a conspicuous uptick in artillery fire, and just a few hours after the Ukrainian military requested informational silence. Then on Monday, Russian Telegram channels were alighted with reports of Ukrainian offensives across the 1,000-kilometer front line. And Ukraine's defense minister admitted that in some directions, Ukraine was moving to offensive actions. And the same day, a U.S. Department of Defense official told Politico that U.S. military satellites had reported a significant uptick in movement from Ukrainian positions. So even if the main effort hadn't started yet, by Monday, it was abundantly clear that this was at least the beginning of Ukraine's much-anticipated counteroffensive. At this point, however, it looks like we're mostly just seeing probing attacks with Ukraine, trying to find weak points in Russian defenses ahead of the main advance, which will probably be concentrated in one particular area. Now, there are two pieces of evidence to back this up. Firstly, it looks like Ukraine is still withholding their best weapon systems contrary to Russian claims. We're still yet to see a Leopard tank on the battlefield, which are presumably being withheld for the main advance. Secondly, the fact that Ukraine are attacking along nearly the entire front line suggests that they are probing for weaknesses in the Russian defenses. And that's simply illustrated by the staggering breadth of the Ukrainian offensive with movement across the north and the south, rather than using more targeted strikes. For instance, reports of advances range from near Svatov, a town that lies along the P-66 highway which supplies Russian troops in places like Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, and Bakhmut. But they're also pushing the Russians back on the flanks of the north and south of Bakhmut, with a significant increase in the shelling of Bakhmut itself, where Wagner were recently replaced by the standard Russian army. There have also been reports of Ukrainian advances around Horlivka, a town that sits between Donetsk city and Bakhmut. And there's also been a significant uptick in Ukrainian artillery along the front lines of the Zaporizhzhia Oblast, where the Russians have spent the last few months digging lines of defensive trenches. You get the idea. Then the Ukrainians are pushing back along the entire front line, which suggests that this is more of a probing attack than a more targeted offensive. Now, based on this, we can assume that Kyiv also planned on attacking the front lines in Kherson, as they have everywhere else. But on Tuesday morning at about 2:30 WM, the Nova Kakhovka Dam was blown up, flooding the entire front line. Now, the Nova Kakhovka Dam is by far and away the largest dam in Ukraine, and it sits on the Dnipro River to the northeast of Kherson city. Now, prior to its destruction, the dam held back approximately 18 km of water, and as a result, the destruction will likely lead to the flooding of 80 or so Ukrainian settlements, mostly on the east side of the Dnipro, as well as at least the partial flooding of Kherson city itself, which is currently controlled by the Ukrainians. Now, at the time of writing, we're yet to see the worst effects of the dam breach, and the wave created by the breach is expected to reach Kherson city in the late hours of Tuesday or the early hours of Wednesday morning. All in all, This will put an estimated 16,000 lives at risk and require an enormous evacuation. When we do know more about the specifics of this, we'll be sure to pin a comment on this video, so keep an eye out for that. Anyway, while we don't know the exact details of that just yet, what we do know is that this wasn't a total surprise. During the face-off before the Russians withdrew from Kherson in September of last year, both sides claimed that the other was planning on blowing up the dam. The Russians claimed that the Ukrainians were planning to blow it up to flood the Russians out of Kherson, and Zelensky claimed that Ukrainian intelligence had found evidence that the Russians had mined the dam so that they could flood the city when it was returned to Ukraine. Now, obviously, neither of these things came to pass in September, but unsurprisingly, this time round, both sides have blamed each other here. But looking at the evidence, it strongly suggests that the Russians did it. Kherson City, which will probably be flooded, is currently occupied by the Ukrainians. And as such, this looks like a tactic from the Russians to prevent the Ukrainians from staging a counteroffensive in the south towards Crimea. In fact, on Telegram, Russian soldiers even bragged about blowing up the dam as a means to stop the Ukrainian counteroffensive. And it's not just that either. The Russians have form in this respect. In mid-September, Russian cruise missiles blew up another dam in Ukraine, causing extensive flooding. Now, not only is this a war crime under the Geneva Convention, but the dam's destruction could also have severe long-term consequences to the dam itself. Provides electricity to some 3 million people and 80% of Crimea's fresh water. But on top of that, it could also damage the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which sits on the left bank of the Dnipro River and relies on water from the dam for its cooling systems. Now, fortunately, the reactors should still have enough water to starve off a nuclear disaster for a while, and the International Atomic Energy Agency reckons that there is no immediate nuclear safety risk. Nonetheless, though, the risk of a nuclear incident in Ukraine is now greater than ever. And while, of course, this is terrible news, it does suggest that the Russians are getting desperate. And if Ukraine can definitely prove it was Russia, this will put immense pressure on countries like China and India to take a more active stance against Putin's regime. Russia's invasion of Ukraine succeeded in gathering the countries of the world under a common goal. Poland, one of the countries most opposed to this invasion, showed serious reactions to Russia's Belarusian-backed invasion moves. The strategic location of Poland, which was also supported by the USA, was perfect to support Kiev. Already, Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine has pushed Poland to the forefront of the Second Cold War. This country sided with Ukraine against Russia as a key cog in the NATO alliance, a major contributor to the common defense and a key ally of the United States. Early in the war, Poland served as a temporary headquarters to coordinate the flow of military aid to Ukraine. This operation was shifted to Germany, but Poland remains the key point for the transport of military equipment to Ukraine. While Poland is training at full speed to increase its army to 300,000, it also buys over 1,500 of the most powerful tanks, while HIMARS Patriot and M1 Abrams are deployed to Poland's Russian and Belarusian borders. Poland stores nearly 3,000 NATO military vehicles, tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, artillery, technical security vehicles, and self-propelled bridges will be stored in the center's warehouses. In addition, Poland is taking serious measures and closing its borders on Russia's Kaliningrad border and Belarusian border. Polish Interior Minister Mariusz Kaminski announced that Poland has begun to build a state-of-the-art electronic barrier to monitor and counter any illegal activity on Russia's land border with Kaliningrad territory. It will run 210 kilometers with its clock tracking cameras and motion detectors in these areas and is scheduled to be completed in the fall. Poland has decided to close the border for Russian and Belarusian trucks from June 1st. This decision shocked Russian leader Vladimir Putin and Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko. Polish Minister of Internal Affairs and Administration Mariusz Kaminski recently signed a decree suspending the freight traffic of Russian and Belarusian vehicles across the Belarusian border from June 1. The resolution stipulated that until a special order, Poland would not allow trucks, semi-trailers, trailers or semi-trailers registered on the territory of Belarus and Russia to pass through Belarus. This step was prepared by the Polish Ministry of Internal Affairs in response to the arrest of Andrzej Pokrzobit, an activist of the Polish minority in Belarus and co-chairman of the Union of Poles in Belarus, along with sanctions against 365 Belarusian officials. The head of the ministry, Kaminski, ordered the drafting of sanctions in February, the day after Schubert was convicted by the first instance court. 2 days after this decision, Poland suspended traffic at the Polish-Belarusian highway border crossing in Bobroniki until further notice. Russian and Belarusian vehicles were passing customs control only at a terminal in Koryszyna, the only open crossing of the Polish-Belarusian highway, and at the Kukaraka-Kozlowiki checkpoint. Warsaw not only closed the border gate, but also took critical steps for its security. Polish Defense Minister Mariusz Błaszczak announced that Poland has received MQ-9 Reaper military drones from the USA to monitor the situation on the border with Belarus. The head of the department noted that the MQ-9 unmanned aerial vehicle was delivered to Poland from the USA due to urgent operational need. Now the Polish Air Force will use drones for reconnaissance on the eastern border, especially from Belarus and Ukraine. Poland plans to use leased drones until it buys its own drone. On the other hand, after the closure of Bobrovka checkpoint, the Belarusian regime imposed restrictions as Polish carriers could not use the border crossings on the part of the Belarusian border with Lithuania and Latvia. But Lithuania also closed the Starzy-Las-Bakany railway crossing on the border with Belarus as a retaliatory move. Another critical move to the Promos came from Lithuania. Moscow was also indirectly affected by this. Warsaw, understandably, devotes much of its energies to preventing and, if necessary, resisting another Russian attack on the free world. To this end, Poland has increased its defense budget to 4% of GDP this year. That was twice the value of what NATO asked its members to invest in defense. In addition, the minister of the Polish cabinet, Lukasz Schreiber, stated that the frozen assets of the Russian oligarchs exceeded €1 billion and urged the parliamentary opposition to support the proposed bill. The bill was presented to a special commission of the Polish parliament, which considered proposals to amend the country's constitution. Polish Interior Minister Mariusz Kaminski reported that Poland will impose sanctions on several hundred Belarusian officials in connection with the sentence of Andrzej Pokrzobit, one of the leaders of the Union of Poles in Belarus, in connection with the maintenance of the severe sentence imposed on Andrzej Pokrzobit. It was decided to include in the list of sanctions several hundred representatives of the Lukashenko regime responsible for political repression, especially against Poles living in Belarus, Kaminski said. The Supreme Court of Belarus rejected Andrzej Pokrzobit's appeal and upheld the 8-year sentence of the first instance court in the strict regime colony. Warsaw was moved by the Belarusian Supreme Court's decision in February to uphold the conviction of Andrzej Pokrzobit, a Polish-Belarusian activist who was sentenced to 8 years in prison for inciting hatred. The tit-for-tat moves between Warsaw and Minsk, Moscow were once again critical at the center of events. In addition, the Polish Ministry of Defense has launched a free program called Train with the Army, which offers private military training with members of the military to people aged 15 to 65. The Train with the Army aims to provide citizens with basic military skills and encourage additional volunteers to join the nation's armed forces. The first edition of this program took place in the fall. At the time, demand significantly exceeded the number of spots available at 4,000. But in the latest training, the number of places available has doubled to 8,000. Also, the Polish government has launched a 16-day basic military training course for anyone interested. The head of the Ministry of Defense emphasized that the organization of such training is important to increase the reserve troop reserves of the Polish army. Poland also recently ordered over $10 billion in weapons from South Korea. The deals include 200 K9 Thunder howitzers, 48 Fa-50 light attack aircraft, 180 K2 Black Panther tanks, and 218 K2 39 rocket launchers. Considering all these, it's very important that Poland is an ally of Kiev against the Russian occupation, against both the Minsk and Moscow governments, because Poland boasts that its army may soon be 3 times larger than the United Kingdom. The Polish government states that within 2 years the country's armed forces will double, making it one of the most powerful military groups in Europe. Russia's invasion of Ukraine spurred the Polish government, which ordered billions of pounds for around 1,500 tanks. Most of them will come from South Korea, with 1,000 K2s purchased, 250 BR and new M1A2 Abrams will come from America, along with 116 old M1A1 Abrams. These will be used to temporarily replace tanks sent to aid Ukraine. Alongside these military moves, Polish Defense Minister Mariusz Błaszczak announced plans to double the country's army from 150,000 to 300,000. In summary, if Russia and Belarus continue to take joint steps for the invasion of Ukraine, they will face Poland, which is supported by a military-strong country like the USA. So Ukraine is not alone on 2 different fronts. Thank you for watching us.